Hello and welcome. I'm Elaine Canyon, sweetly writing happily ever after, one book at a time. And in this video, we're going to talk about fan fiction. Fan fiction. This is a word that is either absolutely benign to some and completely dividing to others. I have made no secret that I started in the fan fiction community with my writing. And I want to share with you today the 2 bad habits that I picked up writing fan fiction and the 6 things that fan fiction taught me that have been invaluable to me being able to write original fiction. So let's start out with explaining what fan fiction is for those of you that the word is familiar but also very foreign. Fan fiction is using anything from another author that you base your story around or in. So you could use the world of Lord of the Rings and create all of your own characters, but because everything happens in Middle Earth, you are writing fan fiction. You could take the characters out of Harry Potter and put them in a completely different world, like the modern today world, and write a story around them without magic as regular people, and you'd be writing fan fiction. Now, this doesn't have to just come from books. I gave examples of books because that's where I was in the fan fiction community. But you can find fan fiction that revolves around TV shows, video games, movies, comic books, literally anything that you can think of that has a storyline. You can create fan fiction around it. You can even create fan fiction around historical mythology. There's fan fiction out there for Greek gods. It just all depends on where you want to come at it as you're writing it. What part of the world interests you that you want to bring in to your storytelling. Now, fan fiction does tend to be most popular for its explicit content. Fan fiction has the same scenario that original fiction has, in that romance is the most popular and explicit romance is the most popular on top of that. So knowing that and taking that into account, you can understand that while yes, that's probably what you're going to find the most of, it does not mean that's all that's out there. That would be like saying to someone who's never read a book before, oh, well, the only thing you'll find in bookstores these days is erotica. That's not an accurate statement, nor is it a fair statement. So understanding that in fan fiction, yes, it's known for its explicit content, that's understandable, because if you were to only look at what sells the most in publishing, you would see that we also could say that publishing is known for explicit content. There's a lot more to it than that. So now that we've helped to define fan fiction and clear up the most common misconception that comes with it, I want to talk to you about how I started in fan fiction, and then we'll jump into the bad habits I picked up that I still have to work on and the really good lessons that it taught me. So I came to fan fiction a lot later in life than most people. Most people find fan fiction in their teen years. I didn't find it until my late 20s. So I found it in 2016. And that year I had decided to reread a bunch of my favorite books. This is how I found out that as an adult, I don't really love reading YA. But in that list of books that I loved as a teenager, the Harry Potter books were part of that. And so I read all 7 Harry Potter books again. And as I got to the end of book 7, all I wanted was more of the relationship between Harry Potter and Ginny Weasley. That was what I wanted. I wanted a romance novel. I hadn't quite figured that out yet, but I knew I wanted a romance novel. Just I wanted it about those 2 characters. And so I started by just looking up headcanons that I knew existed on Pinterest. I had those come up in my Pinterest feed from searching things about J.K. Rowling and what she had said in her universe would have happened after the books. And in looking for those things, Pinterest fed me to headcanons. And I was like, oh, these are cool. So I started Googling them. And that led me to fanfiction.net, which is one of the biggest fan fiction sites out there. There's so much that you can read in so many different fandoms. It's massive. And fanfiction.net has earned the nickname of FFN by the fanfiction community. So if I slip and say that throughout this video, that's what I'm talking about. Archive of Our Own was the next fanfiction site that I found. That has earned the nickname AO3 among the fanfiction community. And then there were some other sites that I found, but I've kept coming back to FFN and AO3. So there's so many stories, and Harry Potter is a massive fandom, which is a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing because you will never run out of possible stories to read. It's a curse because there's so much to sift through. And I found authors that I loved and I stuck with them, but you run into the same thing in fan fiction that you run into original fiction. There's a certain point where you have read everything that your favorite writer has put out, and you're just waiting for them to put something out. And we'll get to this later, but fan fiction is completely free, which means the only incentive the writer has to write something new is that they feel the urge to write, or they feel the desire to write, and they want to put a story out there. So after a while, I didn't have a lot to read. And I got kind of tired of reading all of these stories. I was like, this is ridiculous. I don't like this story. I don't agree with your perspective on how the characters would interact. And that led to me deciding that I was going to try my hand at it myself, simply because I wanted a very specific story. And to get that story, I realized I was just going to have to write it because no one else had written it the way I wanted it. So I started with flash fiction stories that were less than 1,000 words, and then I started posting them, and that built up, and my stories got a little longer, and that built up, and then my stories got a little longer, and that built up. And then I was posting a lot of fan fiction in the Harry Potter universe. And as I kept doing that, I realized as I finished a 93,000 word fan fiction that took characters out of Harry Potter and put them into my own magical world and put them on a completely different adventure with a completely different magic system, that maybe I might be able to write original fiction too if I actually tried. So in 2021, I shifted away a little bit from fan fiction and started focusing on original fiction. Now, I do still read a lot of fan fiction, and I have friends in the fan fiction community that I still write birthday gifts for and post periodically for that. But for the most part right now, my focus is completely on original fiction and learning to do this process and sharing it with all of you. So now, what are the 2 things that I wish I hadn't brought with me from fan fiction, and what are the 6 things that I'm so grateful I did? The first bad habit is dialogue tags. Fan fiction readers and fan fiction writers took this idea that you shouldn't use said all the time and ran with it. So when you read fan fiction and when you write fan fiction, it's expected to not see the word said ever. Your characters are going to laugh. Your characters are going to sigh. They're going to smirk. They're going to raise an eyebrow. They're going to shake their head. They're going to do all of the things other than use the word said. You will not see it. Sometimes you do. Every now and again you do. Especially if it's someone who is trying to do what I'm trying to do and move away from fan fiction as their main writing source and into original fiction. You'll see it more with those authors. But you don't tend to see the word said. You tend to see all of the crazy dialogue tags that drive editors up a wall. And it's required a lot of work on my end to start getting rid of them and learning how to not do that. And I can catch them now. I'm really good at catching when I've done it and if I haven't used said. But it is effort. If you've heard of Alexa Dawn, She's also an author tuber. Her channel is a lot of fun. She's got some really good advice, especially if you want to be traditionally published. I would highly recommend her. She is traditionally published and she shares that side of the story. But she also started in fan fiction, and she did a video where she talked about how dialogue tags were the bane of her existence for the first little bit of editing her first novel and getting it ready to query and submit for publishing, because she brought that bad habit with her from fan fiction. And she says that now if she's reading a manuscript from somebody and trying to help them edit it, she can tell when they've started in fan fiction because of those dialogue tags. So that's the first bad habit that I picked up writing fan fiction. The second is character descriptions. Now, the kind of fan fiction I wrote was to take characters out of the world and put them in my own worlds. The problem that comes with this is that everybody knows what Harry Potter looks like in Harry Potter fan fiction. If you're reading Harry Potter fan fiction, you know what Harry Potter looks like. You know what Ginny Weasley looks like. You don't need that to be described to you. And even for characters who are less well-known, or characters who are mentioned once in the book and have kind of become the fandom's character, even they don't need to be described very much, because fandom has set a character description that's most popular, or a set of descriptions that are popular, and you just reference one of those things and the fandom knows what you're talking about. You can't do that in original fiction. You have to learn how to let your reader know what your characters look like. And that has been hard for me to figure out how to do organically. It's taken a lot of work to not be the writer that puts my character in front of a mirror as they study their own face. Because nobody wants to read that. Nobody wants to see that. And so it's funny to look at some of my first attempts at original fiction, because they really are just characters without any shape or form. They're just people. You know it's a guy and you know it's a girl, and that's it. Because in fan fiction, you don't have to learn how to describe a character. You really don't. Because for the most part, the characters that you're writing are characters that everybody already knows. Now, if you're taking all of your characters as original characters you're making up and putting them into a world, I would imagine you have the opposite problem I have, where you know how to describe a character, but you struggle with describing the setting, because everybody knows what Middle Earth looks like and each of the different kingdoms if they're reading Lord of the Rings fan fiction. So those are the two bad habits that I picked up writing fan fiction. Let's talk about the 6 things that I've learned that have been invaluable to me in writing original fiction. The first is getting criticism. Regardless of where you put up your story, you have opened yourself up to reviews and comments on your story. And I will admit I have gotten mostly nice comments and nice reviews, but I have gotten good criticism from people before. I've also gotten really weird criticism from people before. Someone writing on my story that they didn't like the pairing that I've stated very specifically in the tags and in the description of the story was the pairing. So you get the oddball thing every now and again, but you get the good stuff too. You get the things that say, hey, this was confusing. I didn't understand what you were trying to do here. And you also get the praise, which is fun. It's fun to get someone who jumps on and says, oh my gosh, I loved this so much. I hope you write it over and over and over again. That's a fun feeling to have. But you also have to learn how to take someone getting on and being a troll and saying this sucked. And that's it. Nothing else. Just this sucked. That's not a fun comment to get on your story at all. But it's a good comment to get if you're hoping to move forward and learn how to take criticism and identify what's useful and what's just trying to be hurtful. Because I have gotten story criticisms that were very useful. Hey, using this specific punctuation actually means this. Or hey, because this is a made-up word, it actually has to be capitalized. That was something I didn't know back in 2016. I didn't know that Quidditch needed to be capitalized. Know that that was a grammar rule. I probably could have told you that back in my English classes in high school and college, but I had been out of college for a good chunk of time by then, and I wasn't actively writing. And so that kind of thing didn't occur to me. So you learn how to take the valid points that people give you and then move on and away from the trolls and the people who are just mean or who really shouldn't have picked up your story in the first place because it's not a story that they were interested in. Okay, the second thing that made a massive difference in my shift from fan fiction to original fiction is that original fiction taught me how to keep a schedule. Just like in original fiction, if you want to keep a fan base, you have to keep them engaged. Fan fiction's the same way. If you want people to read your stories, you have to be posting stories. And I learned that if I posted every week, then I managed to get a lot more people to read my stories and to leave reviews and to leave comments and tell me what they thought. And then I started posting longer stories and I moved away from those flash fiction stories as much and doing a chapter every week. And I gained the trust of the audience I had at the time by never missing a week without telling them first. So if I was going to miss a week, I would let them know in advance and they'd get 2 chapters the week that I let them know that there would be a gap. I managed to never miss a week for multiple years in a row that wasn't planned. And it gave me a reputation among the fan fiction community as someone that could be trusted. I saw people post about me on Tumblr saying, oh, you can trust that this author will finish the story even though she is only 10 chapters in. She's never not finished before. So being able to be consistent in my fan fiction taught me to be consistent in my author career. Being consistent in the things that I choose, like a newsletter. Being consistent in how often I post here on YouTube. Being consistent in how often I post on Instagram. Those are things that I have control over, and I learned to manage all of that kind of stuff when I was writing fan fiction and posting fan fiction weekly. Fan fiction also taught me to juggle multiple things at once. So when I was writing fan fiction, I was usually writing 2 to 3 different stories at a time. Most of the time, one of them was the big long story that I was writing that was going to be 40 chapters or 60 chapters, whatever it ended up being. And then I would have something shorter that was only going to be maybe 10 to 15 chapters. And then I would have those shorter flash fictions that I would post here and there. All of that taught me how to keep multiple stories going at the same time. Now, in my original fiction, I don't do that as much, but it's helped a ton to juggle the editing with YouTube and everything that goes into YouTube, with building an author website, with trying to keep up a newsletter. All of that is a juggling act. So moving away from what I was juggling in fan fiction to what I'm juggling here in my author platform has made a massive difference in helping me not feel so overwhelmed and helping me stay on top of things and having already developed tools to keep me going. Now, obviously, this isn't something that everybody learns in fan fiction, but it is something I learned in fan fiction. Number 4 is finding community. Now, a lot of people will tell you that in the author world, you want to find your community. And fan fiction was a great way for me to build into that. I am an introvert, naturally. I'm an extroverted introvert. I like people. I like to be around people. I have a really hard time being the person to reach out to people. I can make myself do it. I don't love doing it. I would much rather someone come up to me and talk to me. And I think a lot of authors can relate to that. Fan fiction was a really great way to learn how to start reaching out. Because in the author world, we're all just authors. And we might write in the same genre, but maybe not the same subgenre. Or we might write in the same subgenre, but we don't know right away. And it can just be intimidating, especially when you find out that someone is further along in the process than you are, and then you have imposter syndrome, and it's a whole thing. But in the fan fiction community, what's awesome about how you write your stories is that your readers and the other authors that you interact with, you have this really specific niche in common to already jump off of. So I had people who were really into specific pairings that I wrote who reached out to me, and that I was able to reach out to other people that I saw were really into the same pairings I was into. And it was so much easier to be like, oh, I loved how you wrote this, because I was already a fan of them, or they were already a fan of me, and we were able to geek out together. And that creates a much stronger bond than, oh, you write and publish, I write and want to publish. Or, oh, you write and publish, I write and publish. There's something about just really bonding over a love for seeing two characters together, or seeing a world a specific way, or whatever it is in your fan fiction that you have in common with those other people who write what you write. It's just easier. And I'm not exactly sure why, but it is. And I loved that because it made it really easy to build community. It taught me the importance of community. I still have those friends in fan fiction that I write birthday presents for every year. And I have their birthdays written down so that I remember this is when I need to have a story ready for them by. And I reach out and say, hey, your birthday's coming up. What flash fiction do you want this year? And it's a fun way to still stay connected to them, even though some of us are moving away from fan fiction. Some of us because we're trying to move into the original fiction world. And for some of my friends, it's because life has taken over and they just can't keep going with it right now. They don't have the bandwidth to be writing fan fiction and doing everything else that life is requiring of them. But these were the friends that cheered me on and that I cheered on as we wrote stories, and that we shared pieces with each other because we were just so excited that these two characters finally kissed, and we had to share it because it wasn't going to post until Saturday. It's that kind of thing. Beta reading was something that I learned how to do in fan fiction community, and that I had other people do for me in my fan fiction. Community in fan fiction was integral to me understanding the importance of a lot of the things that are necessary in original fiction, and how we all come together to help each other and lift each other up. Number 5 is what works in stories and what doesn't. Fan fiction is amazing because you can write whatever your heart desires. There are no rules in fan fiction. And you can jump in any direction you want to jump. That doesn't mean you'll get readers. And here's what I'm talking about. I learned what people loved in stories. I learned based on reviews and comments where people were the most excited and where they were the least excited. Now, granted, some of that does have to do with pairings and things like that of who you're putting together, but from the people who loved the pairing, I was able to learn what worked and kept them interested and what didn't and where they fell off. And that was huge in helping me learn to develop storytelling in a way that was engaging. And by the time I was writing my big fan fiction novels, I was writing stories that I was confident were keeping readers hooked and in the moment with me, even if it was a small reader set because it wasn't a popular pairing. I could see when I kept readers engaged and when I didn't. And I could predict as I was writing whether or not what my idea was as I was going about, I'm like, oh, I could do this. I was able to say, oh, but you know, that won't keep my readers and that won't keep them engaged and in the story. And I could move on to the next idea. The last thing that I wanted to put on here is that fan fiction is free. And so fan fiction taught me not to be afraid of free. There are a lot of things in the author world where we're suggested and advised to give something to our readers. Whether it's a reader magnet, whether it's the first 2 chapters of your book, whatever it may be, we're suggested to give something away to potential readers or to current readers. And a lot of authors that I've talked to, this bothers them, which has always been interesting to me because I started in a space where everything is created for free, everything is consumed for free. Nothing in fan fiction is paid for. Now, yes, there are fan fiction writers who will set up like a Ko-fi or something like that where you can go tip them, but the majority of us created for free, create for free, and consume for free. And that has made a huge difference in the way I view giving something away to my readers at no cost or charge or strings attached. Now, I'm not saying that that means that we should be giving things away for free as authors, but what I am saying is that it gave me a different perspective than a lot of authors that I've talked to, because I was able to look at it from somebody who had spent 5 years writing only stories for free and reading stories mostly for free. I was still reading books I was paying for, but a lot of my reading was in fan fiction. And to be honest, a chunk of my reading is still in fan fiction. But what it did was it let me have a different viewpoint coming into it. So I wasn't immediately turned off, and I was able to take some more time to look at all of the angles because my gut reaction wasn't panic. Now, if you are someone who also came from the fan fiction community and are currently moving towards publishing original fiction or have already published original fiction, I wanted to make sure that you knew about something that when I first learned about it, it made me laugh because it felt like the original version of fan fiction. Kindle Vella, Radish, and Wattpad paid stories are all ways that you, if you thrived off of that weekly posting schedule, can make money writing the exact same way you wrote in fan fiction, just in your original fiction. There are tons of people out there who know way more about it than I do. I'm not sold that I want to do it. I'm kind of leaning towards not, but that's for a different video. However, if you loved that weekly posting schedule and if you thrived off of that chapter by chapter feedback, then I would definitely suggest looking into Wattpad paid stories, Radish, Kindle Vella, and everything else that falls in that category of serialized fiction. That's what it's going to be called when you're searching for it. You're going to look for serialized fiction platforms. And who knows, you might find that that same schedule you used to keep in posting fan fiction works really well for you in posting original fiction. And there you have it. My 2 bad habits that I picked up writing fan fiction and the 6 blessings that it brought to me that I wouldn't give up for anything. Have you ever written fan fiction before? If you did, what fandoms did you write in? If you haven't written fan fiction before, how did your writing journey start? I want to know about it down in the comments. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. It helps other authors find it. If you don't want to miss any of my upcoming videos, make sure you hit the subscribe button. I post videos on Wednesdays about discovery writing, cover design, and publishing on almost nothing. I hope to see you again soon.